We have a really strange mixture of biblical theology, the supernatural world, the unseen world, mixed in with all this UFO stuff, sightings, alleged alien contact and abductions. What do we do with all this? How do we process it? I really do think processing is the key.
But the reality is that we have a lot of these striking claims that have come out through our government over the past 4 to 5 years. And the wording and the articles and the documents and just the press releases and the congressional hearings, they've all created a stir. And many in the church have seen their faith shaken, and they're looking for answers. So I want to bring my audience kind of in, because I'm just going to, assume that maybe nobody knows about these things. And I want to just go through a little bit of a timeline that I put together that I think you'll appreciate, some clips that you sent to me as well. I want to just take us through a timeline over these past 4 years through a couple clips that show us these recent developments that have me and you here talking, that had Tucker and Rogan there talking, because I think they're significant. So let's cut over to this real quick.
Please tell people your credentials, what your background is.
Sure. So, my name is Ryan Graves. I have an engineering degree, mechanical and aerospace engineering. I promptly left doing that to go fly F-18s for the Navy as soon as I graduated college. Did that for about a decade, both operationally in combat as well as in an instructor role, teaching the new students. And, we did witness something while we were flying in our jets, but we were doing it we witnessed it in the context of our just everyday flying and our missions.
Wow.
Well, the Pentagon turned some heads after forming a UFO task force this summer, but now leaked documents reportedly show defense officials discussing this photo taken from the cockpit of a fighter jet as possibly using, quote, non-human technology.
Now we're seeing part of 2 military reports leaked to a defense news website, thedebrief.org. This includes Pentagon documents reportedly discussing non-human technology and mysterious objects. The leak includes a 2019 email exchange. It was between high-ranking military officials citing concerns about potential aliens underwater here on Earth. We're also seeing leaked photos apparently taken from U.S. fighter jets, with one reportedly showing an unidentified silver cube. It was hovering above the Atlantic. Another leaked photo reportedly shows a triangular craft with lights on its corners, a craft that military pilots claim came popping out of the ocean and then shooting straight up into the air. Now the leak includes an email exchange between the former Vice Chief of Naval Operations and then the current Chief of Staff for the Air Force. According to the debrief, the report shows the task force is also considering the possibility of the UFOs being operated by, quote, intelligence of unknown origin. But at this point, the Pentagon is still officially refusing to comment on the unidentified aerial phenomena. Trace.
It's been so difficult to get here today. I've said, in the Baptist church, we'd say that the devil's in our way. And the devil has been in our way through this thing.
You've stated that the government is in possession of potentially non-human spacecraft. Based on your experience and extensive conversations with experts, do you believe our government has made contact with intelligent extraterrestrials?
Something I can't discuss in public setting.
If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
Kona Blue have anything to do with the program David Grush says exists? News Nation's Joe Khalil is here now with more.
It's called Kona Blue. It is real. It was a special access program, very highly classified. It was proposed from the Pentagon to the Department of Homeland Security. We now have all of these declassified documents, and in them, it describes the purpose of the program as, and I'm going to quote here, acquiring, studying, and engineering technology that the U.S. got from UAPs or UFOs. In the documents, it refers to them as AAVs, Advanced Aerospace Vehicles. Ultimately, the program was scrapped by the Department of Homeland Security, but not before years of planning went into it from the Pentagon.
News Nation's special correspondent Ross Coulthart. What's your reaction, Ross? These declassified, now newly declassified documents in Kona Blue.
Well, look, it does sound sci-fi, but I can tell you there are people inside the Defense Department, former and serving, who do believe that the claims made in the Kona Blue documents were authentic. But that's vigorously disputed, of course, by the ARRO, the Pentagon's UAP investigation team. They did their historical review and published a few weeks ago, and they said, yes, there was this codename Kona Blue program that was proposed, never implemented, but proposed as a special access program, one of the deepest, darkest secrets in the US government. And they claim at ARRO that, of course, they investigated and they found no evidence to support claims of retrieved non-human technology. There are people who are passionately of the view that there is authentic, recovered, non-human technology in the possession of the United States, and they are determined to get access to it so that its utility can be exploited, weapons can be developed, technologies can be advanced to the benefit of the American people.
Is it possible that David Grush might have conflated? I mean, was it Kona Blue that he was talking about, or was he talking about a completely different program?
I'm sure the Pentagon would love you all to believe that David Grush is a deluded person who has no idea what he's talking about. And that's certainly the line they're pushing at the moment. What I can tell you is that there is an abundance of independent, objective witnesses who back what...
Okay. So that was a longer clip, but I think it's important because the timeline of everything that's happened over the past 4 years is the reason why that we're here and why that we're talking. So there was a lot of different events there. We have, Ryan Graves in 2014 first seeing those UFO sightings and reporting them. April 2020, the Pentagon officially releases the UF videos. Then we have the whistleblower and David Grush coming out, and then the congressional hearing with him talking, and then just now these recent releases with the Kona Blue. With Grush's claims about the programs that are out there, it almost feels like they're putting this out so that they can be like, yeah, that's what he's talking about, or whatever. But either way, it's just interesting. And all of these things that our government is saying is why we're here talking. So I wanted to give that foundation to our conversation, so that people out there can see why it's worth us exploring these biblical possibilities. Let's look at this like it really is aliens. But another possible outcome from all of this phenomena is that it's just actually intelligent creatures who have traveled here from another planet. Many Christians refute this claim and think that it would somehow disprove their faith or disrupt the gospel. I want to check out this clip and see if you can help us put this misunderstanding to rest.
One of the reasons why a lot of Christians are troubled by the idea of whether there could really be aliens or not, either in the past or in the present, is that, well, the Bible doesn't describe them. The Bible doesn't mention them. And so that becomes an argument against the idea, so that if they showed up, ooh, that troubles us. There goes our Bible out the window because the Bible never said anything about that. So they'll take a stand that it can't be true because of absence in the Bible. Well, if you really think about it, that's a pretty poor argument, because the Bible doesn't mention a lot of things that we know are real, like cars or microwaves or toilet paper, okay? There are lots of things that aren't in the Bible that we just know are real. Another one is the image of God. If there are really aliens out there, then humanity is no longer unique. Now, when I put things that way, you can already tell that people are sort of predisposed to understanding human uniqueness and the image of God in a very particular way. And if you take that perspective, when you say, well, what if there is ET? So what? So what if we have intelligent alien life? That is not what imaging is. If there are extraterrestrials, they're not even in the equation. They're not even in the picture in Genesis 1. They would be created beings in biblical thinking, but they're not imagers. They're not members of the heavenly host. They're not humans. They are just intelligent beings that exist somewhere else that God happened to make. God doesn't have to tell us everything he does, everything he did or will do. And we're back to the whole, it's not in the Bible, so it can't be real kind of argument, which again is flawed. The Bible is not a record of everything that God has ever done or will do.
So when we're talking like this is actual aliens, like it could actually be something from another planet, help us understand how we don't have to lose our faith if this all turns out to be actual aliens from another planet.
Yeah, hypothetically, if there are aliens in existence and we were to come in contact with them, again, I'm not at all suggesting that this is the case, actually. I just have not seen any proof of that. But if it does turn out to be the case, I mean, let's say that, you know, the president comes out on a Friday and says, hey, you know, we found Spock and here he is, you know, and he discloses the reality of a ET presence or whatever. That happens on a Friday. I'll think it's cool on a Saturday and I'll go to church on Sunday. I don't have any problem with that theologically. And I don't think anybody should have a problem with that theologically. Some of the big questions that come up, of course, is, you know, one that Mike mentioned in the documentary, namely, well, the Bible doesn't actually say anything about aliens, and therefore they can't exist. You know, this is not true. Or there will be some people who say, oh, this is just some sort of demonic deception or something like that, because the Bible doesn't say anything about aliens. And but again, as Mike says, that there are lots of things that the Bible doesn't talk about, you know, and you know, the Bible doesn't give us all truth, right? If you think the Bible speaks truth, that doesn't commit you to believing that the Bible speaks all truth. The Bible doesn't tell us the distance in miles between the earth and the sun, for example, and yet we know that that's what, some 93 million miles or something like that. I want to say real quick, from a scientific standpoint, you know, it's hard to tell what the future is going to hold here, but from a scientific standpoint, it sometimes can be the case that you have as a human species, you know, people trying to figure out their place in the world and trying to figure out the world in which they live, that we're constantly making new discoveries all the time. And before that new discovery of something actually is confirmed, sometimes you have these lingering, very mysterious, complex reports that you, in the meantime, don't know what to do with until you have actual confirmation. And one very clear example of this is the case of the gorilla, right? So there's an article that I would point everybody to. It's called "Discovering Gorillas: The Journey from Mythic to Real," and it's in a journal. It's who's it written by here? I've got it pulled up. James Newman. And but basically, it's this. You know, he talks about how nobody knew gorillas were a thing. At least nobody outside of certain tribes in Africa. Nobody really knew they existed until the mid 19th century, so the mid 1800s. And prior to that, you had these reports, you know, of these humanoid type things or human looking creatures. I mean, you had this sort of language that makes you think, my gosh, what kind of monster is living in these jungles? And there was lots of lore associated with it. Like at one point, the rumors were that these humanoid creatures would kidnap the women and take them away. And you had, you know, all these sorts of things going that just were not true, actually. But you had a kernel of truth that there was something that we hadn't discovered yet that is humanoid, that's pretty intelligent, that looks like a human being, that's really strong. There are kernels of truth there, but there was a lot of myth surrounding it that just ended up not being true. And in fact, until multiple eyewitness accounts from credible scientists emerged, they, you know, we didn't know much about the gorilla until, you know, around the turn of the century or so. 1900s, right before then, I think is what it was. But I bring this up because James, in his article, he starts off his paper with this one sentence. Here's the first sentence. He says, "The discovery of the real often starts within the realm of the myth. The discovery of the real often starts within the realm of the myth." And I think that's a very powerful line. And I think, I'm not saying this is true, I have no idea, but it could be the case that what we're experiencing with this phenomena is quite prosaic. That, for starters, I mean, let's just hypothetically say this is non-human, completely non-human. It's not some advanced military technology or some sort of corporate technology that nobody knows of yet. Let's just get the human out of the equation, and let's just suppose that this is some other life form, life thing. And right now it's existing within that realm of the myth. And there's lots of mistakes that we're making. There are lots of rumors that are untrue, lots of weird things that will prove to be false about the phenomena. Okay. But suppose that all it ends up being is just another form of life, right? Another type of species. And suppose that's the case. And here you have another case of a discovery of a proverbial gorilla, right? And that's happened before. That sort of thing is not out of the question. Maybe this is all that is. I'm not saying I think it is. I'm not saying I think it's not. I'm just saying I think it's a possibility. And that chastens us a little bit to just come back and say, there's a lot that maybe we just don't know.
Yeah.
And unless someone think that, Matt, this just is preposterous or whatever. It's interesting. I don't think it's preposterous for the reasons I've just given, but it is interesting that other people who are a lot smarter than me and who have a lot more knowledge about these sorts of things than I probably ever will, it's interesting what they're saying about this sort of topic. One example of this is a former CIA director, John Brennan. He was asked about UFOs, and of course everybody thinks, oh, if anybody knows about it, it's going to be the CIA director, right? And that's an assumption that we make too, perhaps. Why do we make that assumption? But anyway, but that's sort of the way we think about this topic. But he was asked that, and to his credit, he gives a response. And if I remember right, people can go look this up, but he kind of chuckled at the question, but in a serious mode and being in a very meaningful tone. He says, it could be the case that we discover that this is just another type of life or another form of life that we've yet to understand, or however he puts it. It's something like that. And I found that very interesting, that this, possibly what we're going to be seeing, he says, is that this could be another expression or form of life. And I find that really interesting. And so I think it's worth considering. Now, if that's the case, all right, this is where I'm going with this. If that's the case, and it's at least reasonable to consider that to be the case, which I think it is, then I would caution people within our own ranks, Christians, whether theologian, layman, whoever, don't jump quickly to the spiritual hypothesis to account for all of this. I do think that there are things that are spiritual that get confused for UAP, of course, but I'm not convinced that should be considered the sum total of the narrative. No. It could just be a gorilla. So, there are lots of truths that we get from other places that don't come from the Bible. So maybe this is one of those truths. Maybe this is something we discover. In fact, I think that would be in the character of God, even because he's given us a mind, he's given us a brain, he's given us curiosity, and he's given us scientific methodology. And, he's very keen on us, it seems, for discovering truth. We discovered that we could go to the moon. We discovered that we can send probes to distant planets. And so, and I think that's just a product of our rationality, which is a gift from God himself. And so, anyway, that's that issue. You do get into other questions, such as the uniqueness. That was something that was brought up. But I find that argument to be completely baseless. I mean, it assumes that in order to be deeply loved by God, that I have to be the only one made by God. I have more than one child, and I love them all very much. And I don't need to just have one child to be able to love them maximally. Right. And this is something that theologians discuss often, that God's love is not like a bank account that can be go into a deficit or be empty. No, God is infinite, and therefore his ability to love is infinite. You do get into salvific soteriological questions, namely, what would this mean in terms of salvation? Well, we don't need to assume, here's another assumption. We don't need to assume that aliens need to be redeemed, right? I mean, it could be the case, after all, that aliens are far more morally upright than we are, and that's not going to take a huge imagination to think. And moreover, maybe God doesn't have a plan of redemption for them if they do need to be redeemed. In Christian theology, there doesn't seem to be a consensus at all. Well, actually, there does seem to be a large consensus that like the demons don't have a way to be saved or whatever, and so maybe the nature of their choice to rebel against God is such that it would make an offer of salvation completely irrelevant. We just don't know the ontology of these beings. There's a lot we don't know.
Yeah.
With respect to their character and things like that. And moreover, I think that I think that this question is actually worth considering. I tell people this all the time, and theologians think this way too, is how even if you don't think there are aliens, even if you were to know there were no aliens, like I don't know how you would know that, but let's suppose you did. It's still an interesting question to ask of theology. Like I like to ask questions. I love to pick topics apart and dissect them, and it's fun to ask deep questions of our Christian theology, because we should not be afraid of that, because if it's true, which I believe it is, if it is true, then it can withstand the question. In fact, it would do more than withstand the question. It would welcome the question, because that gives us an opportunity to learn. So I liken Christian theology to, say, a rubber band. Let's stretch it. Let's see its strength, because I don't think that there's anything that could stretch it to the point of being breaking, to break. I don't think that it's possible. I don't think, because I'm convinced, as I said earlier, that Christianity is true. I don't think you can break the Christian theology. And it's good to get in this habit with our ideologies, is to test them out, to test our ideas, because if we hold ideas that do break, then we need to go find something that is unbreakable. We need that foundation.
Yeah, another theologian and author that I love, Joshua Ryan Butler, wrote a book called The Skeletons in God's Closet. And just whatever, without going into the book, it's just the premise that if you're going to have faith in God, you should be able to go up to the closet and explore, because there shouldn't be any skeletons in God's closet. And that it's that exploration of that thought that actually brings you to God himself. And that this, it's even with this moment for what you're talking about, it's like to create room for that reality to happen, that if little green men, from aliens, whatever, are real, it's the same thing for what we're talking about with the divine council worldview or these spiritual beings. I mean, I was brought up in such a way, in such a faith, that these things were never talked about, that when I was first exposed to them by the Bible Project and Dr. Heiser, it was like they were aliens to me. You know what I mean? Spiritual beings and this kind of things, that was alien to me. And then to know that this was, I had to go through that process of what you're talking about, and to know that I can leave that door open and not think that God's going to have something scary in his closet is a really important part to bring out. And I'm glad.
We need to be honest. The world is a lot stranger than what we think it is. There are a lot of people who just go through life thinking everything is nailed down. We've been given every answer by science, or we will be given that answer by science. There are no anomalies. There's nothing really strange that transcends the physical world. We know that isn't true. There is a spiritual world. So what we need to do is be honest. The world is a strange place. There's a lot more going on than we might think. We need to just embrace that idea and then try to process what it is that people experience, what they see, in an honest way.
Thank you for watching another episode of Ring Them Bells. Stay tuned. We have a special part 2 in our interview with Matthew Halsted, going over the divine council, aliens, and a recent Joe Rogan interview with Tucker Carlson. Many people think there's a connection between UFOs, extraterrestrials, spirituality, and the Bible. For example, did Ezekiel see a spacecraft? Are UFOs demons? In this conversation, we take a deep dive into these topics and more. Stay tuned, you guys. You are going to love this exciting episode. The beginning is near.